I think if we're diverting the aid budget away from countries like India that have got space programs and nuclear weapons towards humanitarian missions, I'm perfectly happy with it.
Is it enough?
Well, that's almost, I mean, there are something like 4 million displaced people from Syria. So, frankly, you could answer that by saying however much you put in, it's never going to be enough. But I do think there's been a slight change of thinking. I mean, the lunacy of the EU policy, which we saw set out in April by Mr. Juncker, which basically said that wherever you came from, provided you put one foot on European soil, you could claim asylum. I think there is a rethink going on.
But you support the idea of taking refugees who are persecuted because of race, nationality, religion.
I've always believed in that, and I think this country has a long tradition of helping genuine refugees. The problem with the EU policy is they've set the bounds so wide that it even includes people who come from poverty, and that's why you've seen, with Mrs. Merkel's statement and everything else, a virtual stampede of people coming into Europe.
Though we have a situation where we have people bringing their children over barefoot, we have kids falling out of boats. You wouldn't suggest these people are coming over just because they want an extra buck?
Well, you would suggest that it's families moving because they want a better life. And I've no doubt that many people who come from countries where life isn't particularly pleasant.
Syria?
Well, Syria is one country, and about 1 in 5 of those that come from Syria. But the rest are coming from all across the rest of the world. I mean, look, the UNHCR say there are 59 million displaced people in the world at the moment. And the folly of Mr. Juncker and quite frankly, madness of Mrs. Merkel's comments is the message went out, anyone can come.
But bona fide, as you would suggest, refugees should be allowed to come, and do you think we should be taking more than 20,000 over 5 years?
I think rather than discussing the 4,000 a year that'll be coming from Syria under the government's plan, we ought to think about this the other way round. What we should be discussing is why were 640,000 people, mostly economic migrants, allowed to settle in Britain last year. And that's the point. We are, in a sense, with the whole migration debate, refugee debate, we're putting the cart before the horse. Let's talk about why 640,000 people came last year.
But in terms of people fleeing for their lives, you are of Huguenot stock. 500,000 Huguenots had to flee from France to Scotland, Wales, England, Denmark, Sweden. You wouldn't be here if people hadn't taken your family in.
Yeah, I mean, 50,000 Huguenots came to Britain, but do remember they came over the space of 100 years. This was a very spread out process. But you're right, it was a very large number of people that came to Britain, and equally, I mean, when Amin threatened to kill the Asians in Uganda, and the British having really had a big moral debate about what to do, said yes to 28,000 people. Our problem is that the sheer number of economic migrants coming to Britain every year is so massive already that perhaps as a country, our ability, our willingness to take large numbers even of genuine refugees is not as good as it should be.
But when you look at the Hungarian Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, he has said that Europe and European identity is rooted in Christianity. Is it not worrying that European Christianity is barely able to keep Europe Christian? Do you believe that there should be a differential between people from a Judeo-Christian background and people from other backgrounds?
Well, on a strict refugee definition, no. Although I have heard some ludicrous comments from Mr. Juncker and Mr. Cameron that religion should not be a part of this. Of course it should. And actually, one of the most persecuted groups in Iraq and in Syria are the Christian community. And it's quite clear that from Mr. Cameron's programme, we won't be taking a single Christian. So you could argue that you could argue that for a Christian, they've got almost nowhere to go anymore in those countries, and that they should, have some measure. Orban's comment's a different comment.
Yeah.
What Viktor Orban is saying is that his country is a country of a strong Christian culture, and he is worried about a very large number of Muslim people coming into that country. And that's an argument that gets shouted down in Brussels.
But do you agree with
But it's an argument, hang on a second, it's an argument that he believes, it's an argument the Slovaks believe, it's an argument the Poles believe. He's not on his own in saying this. My concern, my real concern with what is happening across the Mediterranean is not about the religion of the people that come, it is that we are opening our doors to jihadism, and that I think is the most serious threat from this whole crisis.
But that is an assumption. You cannot assume.
No, I really can't have this. We've recently had 5 people detained by the police in Hungary with jihadist images on their phone. We saw one of the suspects from the first Tunisian massacre landing on a beach in Italy and sort of, having celebrated with photographs taken. We have, even when Mr. Cameron went to the camps in Lebanon, he said, be aware that 2% of these people are jihadist activists. We've had ministers in Libya saying much the same thing. So everywhere you look, we know that unless we're very strict about who is a refugee, unless we're able to do some sensible background checks, that we may have a very serious problem.
But you have no problem with the majority of refugees coming to this country being Muslim?
If people, regardless of being Christian or Jewish or Muslim, if they fit with the 1951 definition, the Geneva definition of what a refugee is, then that's the criteria we should use. The problem is that what the EU has done is to throw that definition out of the window and come up with their own definition with the EU's common asylum policy, and they've set the bounds too wide.
How do you solve the problem of Syria? Your immigration spokesman has said that it's time now to back Assad to create a safe zone. Is he right?
I mean, look, in 2013, we had this extraordinary situation where the government, particularly Mr. Cameron and Mr. Hague, the Foreign Secretary, were urging us to arm the rebels. And there were some of us saying, for goodness sake, can we please think about this? 2 years on, rather than arming the rebels, we now want to bomb the rebels. And when George Osborne was asked, well, does that mean we're supporting Assad? He said we're against Assad too. So whether we want to bomb everybody, I'm just not sure. All I would say to you is this. I made this point a couple of years ago. I was shouted down for it, but I'll make it again. Whatever we think of Mr. Assad, whatever we think of Mr. Putin, and I'm not a fan or supporter of either of their regimes, whatever we think of those people, the fact is, on the bigger fight against ISIS, we're on the same side. So we need to think about this very seriously.
So you agree with your immigration spokesman when he says we must reinstate Assad, however bad he is, as a leader of a Syria to topple IS?
No, what I've said is, can we please have a proper debate? Can we please have a proper...
But he's your immigration spokesman.
Well, he said he was speaking for himself, and that's fine. But do we need to have a debate in Britain about this? Yes. I'm quite frankly, I was bemused by Mr. Osborne the other day, suggesting we're against both sides in Syria. I think we've got to have a proper debate.
You have to make a decision, and you would back Assad?
Well, I wouldn't back ISIS, would I?
So you're backing Assad?
If you put me up against a wall, following a proper debate about a long-term strategy, as opposed to the ridiculous short-term moves, such as the bombing of Libya, I think we should have a debate in Britain, longer term, about how we tackle ISIS, and that will mean, to some extent, not opposing Assad.
You've only got one MP at Westminster, Douglas Carswell, and he takes a different view on Britain's role with refugees. He said he would cheerfully vote for a quota of refugees.
Well, he did. He voted for 20,000.
He's at odds with you, so it begs the question, what is UKIP's policy?
Well, I've just said to you, he said he would accept the government's proposal for 4,000 Syrian refugees each year over the course of the next 5 years. And I haven't opposed that either. What I have said, though, is if we focus on 4,000 people a year, we're forgetting a much more fundamental point.
Cheerfully vote for a quota. That's not the 20,000. Cheerfully vote for a quota.
Well,
he meant within the European context.
Oh, well, that can't be. We want to leave the European Union. Douglas wants to leave the European Union, so we can't vote for an EU quota. And we've got a referendum coming up in which I suspect migration, open borders, how we deal with these things will be the defining issue.
Ram Kassam, who was formerly in an advisory capacity to you, said Douglas Carswell wants it to be the Douglas Carswell party.
That's an opinion. Sounds pretty irrelevant.
Do you agree with that?
Not particularly, no.
You talk to Douglas Carswell a lot about policy.
Yes.
Moving on now. In the past, you've said a young Margaret Thatcher would have joined UKIP.
Well, yeah, because she believed in sovereignty, and she believed she believed in a country controlling itself, and she certainly believed in a country controlling its borders. And Mr. Cameron's Conservative Party moved a very long way away from that.
But your deputy, Paul Nuttall, has said to us today Thatcher's reforms were far too quickly. So, which is it?
Well, it can be both, and the reason is this. Sometimes there are big political issues that are bigger than any traditional left-right divide in politics. And actually, this question, and we're going to be asking ourselves this in the run-up to the referendum, the question of whether we should govern our own country, the question of whether our own Supreme Court should be supreme. These aren't left or right-wing issues. These are issues that bring people together from very different backgrounds.
But it seems to me that there is a kind of Farage position, a Carswell position, a Nuttall position, and they're different. They're not a cohesive position.
Well, the alternative would be Stalinism, wouldn't it? I mean, everybody has their own different interpretation. Some people think this policy matters than that part. Of course they do. I mean, I left a career in business to get into politics because I wanted Britain to leave political union with the EU. That was my primary goal for getting involved in politics. Douglas Carswell's involved in politics because he wants wholesale political reform. He wants direct democracy, he wants e-democracy, and he sees the EU as a massive barrier to it. The fact people have different emphases isn't actually a problem.
You're heading off to your party conference in Doncaster, and I understand from the Telegraph, at least, reliable or not, that your numbers are significantly down. You're slashing ticket prices.
The numbers are booming all over the place.
So, but they're not going to your conference.
Well, of course they're not. We're charging 50 quid. It's ridiculous.
Well, you shouldn't be charging anything to go to your conference.
Well, we shouldn't be charging 50 quid. We are holding
you're not the leader of the party. Do you not have any sway over
Oh, I
this?
tell you what I'll do. I'll give up politics and I'll sit behind a desk and I'll sort out the conference. No, of course I don't sort out the conference. I give political leadership. And what I'm doing now is I'm travelling around the country. We've got the biggest outreach programme that UKIP's ever launched, that the Eurosceptic movement's ever launched. And the numbers that are coming to the meetings are astounding. Every single meeting I've got between now and Christmas is full already.
Okay, tomorrow you're going to be speaking, and that's when they really slash the ticket prices to 20 and 10 quid for children. Does that suggest that you're maybe a little bit toxic?
We've slashed it from 25 quid to 20 quid. What is your point?
My point is that it's not attracting people. People are not prepared to pay the money.
Well, I tell you what, I have got 13 meetings booked between now and Christmas. You're welcome to come to every one of them. They'll be standing room only. The last one I did, we had 1,300 people in there. Before the election, we had 700 people there. We've got more people, more energy, and more momentum than we've had at any time.
If your position is lost in the EU referendum, even if it's won, what happens to UKIP then?
Well, if it's won, then UKIP is the one party that's done some forward planning and forward thinking. Papers produced on how British agriculture would run post-exiting the European Union, papers on how fisheries should be run once we take back control, papers on trade, and actually once we're freed and able to make our own trade arrangements around the world. So we're the one party doing some forward planning. If the referendum were to be lost, and I have to say that if you'd asked me that question the day after the general election, it looked pretty blooming difficult for our side to win the referendum. That looks very different now. If it were to be lost, well, the classical response to losing the referendum is that UKIP would be, obliterated and out in the wilderness. And yet, 18 months ago, we thought that about the SNP if they lost their referendum, and look what happened.
If you lost the referendum, though, would you then resign properly and stay gone?
I have no idea. All I know is that I am now embarked on this tour
but you're not
of the country.
But you're not. You've said that you don't want to lead in the European campaign. You don't. Why not? If you're the magic, why not?
UKIP are leading in the European campaign. We're leading on the ground. We are the only Eurosceptic.
So if you fail, then will you resign?
Well, look, I could be run over by a bus tomorrow. I'm not thinking like that. What I'm thinking about is the campaign. And what you're going to see in Doncaster tomorrow is you're going to see a coming together of all the Eurosceptic groups that want to leave the European Union for the first time ever, together, united on one platform. Everybody said it couldn't happen. Everybody said there were too many egos, there was too much jealousy, there'd be too much infighting, and UKIP tomorrow provides the forum for putting all those groups on one platform. And I believe we can win this referendum.
Nigel Farage, thank you very much.
Thank you.